Alright, I'm going to try this again. There's been some yellow jackets and crap that have gotten into the place here. And last week there was a exterminator here, but they still managed to get into the house itself, and so I'm having to kill them off. And oh hell, I'll be in the way. I'll be glad when the seasons change, and then this will all be done. Won't have to do this anymore. And anyway, I have not been talking too much about stuff, just doing shorts of birds and things like that. And anyway, one of the big stuff they're yapping about is the declining birth rates. And there are some writers that conflate birth rates with fertility rates. And fertility has to do with the capability of having kids, where birth rate is just the number, or the average number of kids a woman has in her lifetime. And of course that's been on the decline, and it's been at least a century decline as we have more industrialization, as more technology, and as women have gotten more education, you know, and job opportunities. Yeah, big families are not conducive to that. And furthermore, the baby boom of post-World War II, which was a result of a real decline in the population. Some 53 million people worldwide died during that time. Yeah, there was a little bit, or somewhat of a decline then. And so there were all these things put in to get the birth rates back up. And it was aided and abetted in the United States by businesses and such, and men, entitled men, to clear the way for jobs when the men returned from the war. And women were working in the factories. They were doing the so-called men's work, and they were very good at it. But when the men came back from Europe and South Pacific and such, time to kick the women out. And then put all these things in, like the GI Bill and favorable tax treatment for married couples and all this kind of shit. And so there was that, but that was a temporary blip. It was of 18 years before the number of babies that were born precipitously declined. And it's never recovered at all. But everybody's all upset about it. Well, it's not compatible. Big families are not compatible with women's rights. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to do the Hungarian method, or whatever you call it, Orban, or whatever the hell his name is. Trying to coerce women into having marriage and having kids and all this traditional crap. But women are just saying no to it. And they continue to say no. And we had this whiny piece well, let's put it on here, where the birth rate crisis isn't as bad as you've heard. It's worse. And you know, yeah, it's gonna create a little bit of pain in the short term, but everything evens out. And fertility is not falling fast. It's the birth rate that's falling fast. And it's all about capitalism. But you know, it ain't just the birth rates, it's the marriage rates. They aren't doing it. Women have had it. They've had it. You could try to shore it up all you want as to why the reasoning why women are not having as many kids or kids. And you could say, oh, it costs so much to have kids, or there's nothing really in place to help women balance a family in a career or job or whatever the hell. And you know, I've heard this shit for 50, 60 years. I've heard this same shit. Different day. And nothing's being done. Nothing ever will be done. Because that's not really what's driving it. The thing that's driving it, women have a lot more options now than they had 70 years ago, 60 years ago. I mean, I grew up during that damn time, in the late 50s, early 60s, and into the 70s, before really things dramatically changed. So I know how shitty it was then, and how few options women had. And, you know, and there's no point romanticizing this crap. But women have found that, you know what? It's all a bunch of bullshit. That it's what's being ignored in all this whining about the birth rate is they're talking about all these policies and all that, but you know, they don't look at the 200-pound primate who plunks his ass on a recliner and gets a beer and expects his wife, his old lady, as my dad used to call him, to fetch for him, fetch his slippers, because he worked so hard during the day. And they're ignoring that. They're not doing shit. And they're getting worse, and men are getting worse by the day. And women are saying, screw it. I'm not put on this earth to serve a dude. So I'm not doing it. I'm not having kids. I'm not doing any of that. And frankly, more women are finding out they like to be single, because it's a peace of mind not having to put up with anybody's BS. And that's really what it is. I mean, when I grew up, I didn't want it. I had much older sisters, and I know what they went through. And of course, my mom. And I didn't want that life. And I was way ahead of my time. You know, 8 years old, that was over 60 years ago. I was way ahead of my time. I didn't want anything to do with it. And now, more women are seeing what I saw all those years ago. And they're saying hell no to it. And of course, we know part of this stuff, especially on the part of our Orange Julius in the White House, that they subscribe to this idiotic great replacement conspiracy theory, which of course was debunked. And of course some Frenchmen came up with it. But it says here in Wikipedia, because I'm too lazy to do further research, the original theory states that with the complicity or cooperation of replacist elites, this is France again, the ethnic French and white European populations at large are being demographically and culturally replaced by non-white peoples, especially from Muslim-majority countries, through mass migration, demographic growth, and a drop in the birth rate of white Europeans. And then, of course, the United States, it's all those horrible, quote-unquote, horrible Mexicans and blacks and other minorities. Oh, it's so bad. Oh, all these illegals, blah, 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 blah. And you know, they never talk about the reason they cut, like, with Latinos and stuff. Why'd they come to the United States? If it weren't for the damn employers insisting on having cheap labor and turning a blind eye to citizenship, you wouldn't have this issue. But of course, it's never the corporation's fault. But anyway, that's a lot of this is what's driving the ridiculous whining about the birth rates. But birth rates are falling all over the world in almost all countries except for a handful of African countries like Nigeria. And it's going to continue to plummet. But it's like every day you see this shit. And I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos and looking at Reddit a lot and Democratic Underground not so much, but in other sites. And it's the same old refrain and every time we have a Republican president, and especially a Republican president and a Republican dominated Congress, we get this message. Women get this message that they need to shift their priorities towards being a housewife and marriage and kids. And, you shouldn't have a career or even a job. Well, of course, a career is a series of jobs. It's not. A lot of people conflate career with profession. So, really, you shouldn't have any type of work. You should be focused on breeding and fucking your husband. And that's all you're for. All this bullshit. Because they want to bring back a mythical era. Something that was never what people think it was, the 50s, because it sucked. And of course, some of the worst offenders trying to bring back that stinking era are these Christo-fascists or Christian Reconstructionists or Rushdoonies loonies types like Douglas Wilson and Joel Webbin and a whole bunch of these other guys that often get profiled on Right Wing Watch and other sites, and in their own words, and these guys are getting more and more vocal and more extreme, and but worst of all is they're getting more and more power. And this is just, and what they are is they're fascists. It's really political. This isn't really religious, but they figure there's a lot of gullible people in the churches, and they can wrap that fascism inside the Bible and all the scripture stuff and completely twist it inside out and hoodwink a lot of people. So in that sense, Rushdoony may have been a lunatic, and I've talked about him. He was born in 1916 and died in 2000 or 2001, something like that. And it was all this twisted Calvinistic stuff that we're going to use Old Testament, in his vision, Old Testament law in civil law. Of course, that would never work. And he was big on the death penalty. These guys are a little slicker. The Wilsons and the Webbins are a little bit slicker. And they hide it. What they would love to see is people being executed just if they don't agree with them. So, anyway, there was this article in CNN, and it's archived, so I'll just put the original links in. And he's up there. This critter is up there in Moscow, Idaho, or Moscow, and that's not far from where one of my nephews and his family live, and that's where I was early in June. Went up there for the first time. And my nephew says the political, apart from this crackpot, the politics up there isn't that bad in that part of Idaho, the Panhandle. He says when you get up near Canada, in like the town of Boundary, I think it is, and you get up in that area, Sandpoint and some of those places, that's where really the batshittery is. But Idaho's full of it. You know, statewide, there's a lot of batshittery and stuff going on. But this guy is, he's batshit, and he's got a giant ego, and he's got a cult. He's basically a cult leader like Jim Jones. And, you know, and so, you know, arguing about women shouldn't have the vote. It's just bullshit. Like, wasn't such a bad idea. God. And, you know, sometimes you wonder, do they really believe this, or are they trying to troll to get attention? You know, everybody's in the grift. Everybody's grifting. And, of course, he's a grifter. Webbin's a grifter. Wallnow's a grifter. All these people are all grifters. And, you know, they're, hell, I just can't deal with it, because it's so obvious they're a bunch of con artists. But the dangerous part is their ilk is gaining power, and of course a lot of these types, and also the very right-wing Catholics, are involved in that Heritage Foundation shit with Project 2025, and they're getting a lot of their stuff implemented by Trump, who's a nut job himself. So it's all scary shit. And this is why I don't focus on a lot of this stuff these days. I can't hardly stand even look at the news, hardly. So I've been trying to focus on other stuff. But anyway, so this guy, yeah, he's another racist, and he's another one that would be peddling the birth rate crisis. And we talked about all this crapola, and I've talked about it with old Ben Wattenberg. Came up with that 40 years ago with his birth dearth crap and all that. And so they're just taking it, and then they're taking that great replacement theory garbage, and they're trying to make policy with it. And there's no way you're going to turn back the clock at all. Women are just going to go without men. They won't even bother. You're going to outlaw abortion. That's going to get the birth rate up. Lots of luck. Lots of luck on that one. You're going to cut off birth control, and you think that's going to make any difference? Hell no. Teens aren't even out doing the nasty like they supposedly did years ago. So they're going to lose. So the adoptions aren't going to go up. And a lot of this is the adoption industry, and they're hoping young women will give up babies. But the biggest reason, abortion was part of it, but the biggest reason that the adoptions started drying up was because women were keeping their babies, and they were completing school thanks to Title IX that made forcing these young girls out of schools, made all that illegal. That they had every right to complete their education and make their place in the world. But they're trying to turn back the clock, and they're going to fail. But it's going to be very painful in the process, in their failure. So anyway, that's going to be it for me tonight. I got to call it good.